Imagine you are going to the burial plots of a loved one. You expect to find them there, right? And instead, when you get there, you find a shattered tombstone and a grave that has been unburied. The casket is lying askew, and when you get closer, you notice the body that you expect to be in there is gone. What's the first thing you think of? It's probably, hey, so-and-so probably got better, right? No, the first thing you think is the worst, right? So somebody robbed the grave of my dearly beloved so-and-so. That's kind of what we have going on here in this scene. But I want to paint the picture a bit more. So the last time we see these women who end up going to the tomb in the Gospel of Luke, they are the only ones who are with Jesus as he dies on the cross. His other followers, the disciples, the male followers, they've all ran for the hills. They're hiding. In Luke's account, they're hiding somewhere in Jerusalem. But they're holding up. And for good reason. They also don't want to be crucified, which seems pretty reasonable to me. It doesn't sound any fun. But who is with Jesus in those moments? It's the women we were just talking about. They have reason to fear as well. Women, during this time period especially, are very vulnerable to the powers that be. They have reason to fear. They could be picked on too. And yet, in their love for Jesus, they stay put. They give him comfort as he dies this terrible criminal's death. And several days later, on a Sunday, kind of like this one, it is they who leave the safety of the hidey holes that the disciples are in Jerusalem and say, all right, Sabbath's over, we got to finish preparing the body of Jesus. That's why they bring the spices. It's not just because, they like how they smell and it's fragrance, or they got like some sort of weird thing for clove, just chewing on it as they go. No, they want to finish preparing Jesus's body for his final resting place. It's an act of care, an act of dignity, and an act of love. A final act of love. Notice the men are nowhere to be found right now either. They're still in the hidey holes, right? They're still at risk, but so are the women. The women are also at risk. One of our very first testimonies to Christianity outside of the Bible happens to be this letter that is written from a governor to the emperor. And he says, I'm trying to investigate this whole Christianity thing. A lot of us are kind of like suspicious of them. So I decided I would grab some female slaves that they called deacons. It's kind of a clue that even back then, even female slaves that society did not have a high view of occupied special positions in the church. For what it's worth. And this governor, captures them and tortures them for information, as you do. Like, that's very thorough research. A tried and true tactic. I'm being facetious. Please don't torture people next time you need to do a research paper, okay? Bad form. And the emperor is like, you know what? That was pretty reasonable. I recommend that, let's not go out of our way to trouble ourselves looking into them. They sound mostly harmless, which is great news for everybody but those female deacons, right? Why would he do that? Why would this governor go for them? Well, because they are the least likely to be able to do anything about it. And so are the women in our story. But out of love and devotion, they go to the tomb, and when they get inside, they find it empty. Jesus' burial cloth has been folded up and neatly put aside. And suddenly, poof, two young men in dazzling white, glow-in-the-dark, luminescent clothing appear to them and say, "Hey, why are you looking for the living among the dead?" It's almost like they're like, "Hey, you should have just known this because Jesus mentioned it." And the women all of a sudden are like, "Oh yeah, I remember Jesus saying that thing, that he would resurrect on the third day." And they're excited. They run from there. They go to the 11 disciples, the 12 minus 1, because one of them was a no-good Judas of a person, as the story goes. And do the men believe them? No. It's interesting to me that Thomas Aquinas, this scholar and immensely influential theologian of the 1200s, calls Mary apostle to the apostles. For those of you who don't know, first, Thomas Aquinas is still immensely influential on Christian traditional thinking today. And second, he had a notoriously low view of women. He viewed women as incomplete men, which is pretty problematic, right? Some of us are from worlds that may not view women that way, but sure do treat women that way. Oh, you're equals in the eyes of God. You just can't do any of the things that the men can do. And yet, while none of them would dare accuse women of being incomplete men, I never heard Thomas Aquinas say this when I grew up in those traditions. And I kind of wish I did. That even Thomas Aquinas has to acknowledge these women, or at least Mary Magdalene, was an apostle, one who is sent from God to the apostles, the first apostles. How interesting. And notice, when they go and they tell the disciples this, our translations, many of them say, well, the disciples thought they were saying, idle tales. And some of our translations even go so far as to say, well, it was old wives' tales. The word in the original Greek is more like garbage. I think our translations are a little bit sexist here. It's a little weird. Here's garbage and here's old wives' tales, and they're like, women telling old wives' tales. No, it's more serious than that. The disciples think that the women are full of it, full of garbage, just making stuff up. They are unconvinced. And yet, Peter gets up and he runs over the tomb, not because he believes, but because he wants to see for himself. And when he gets to the tomb, he still doesn't believe. He is puzzled, perplexed, and left to wonder, well, what did happen? I kind of like this picture of Peter. I feel like it's pretty relatable. This is where our episode ends. Later, Jesus will appear to the disciples in the flesh, and that'll change their hearts and minds after he does a few tricks. That's a story for another day. But I want to talk about how this transformed them from being so fearful and clinging to their hope, their sense of self-preservation of life, their immense fear of death, and then all of a sudden to follow the way of Jesus, the way of Christ. They believe in new life and resurrection. In process theology, Christ can refer to the call of God, the still small voice, calling us to the best that God desires for us and all others around us. And when we lean into what God calls us to, we are living into Christ in our midst. And this kind of agrees with some of how Paul would talk about Christ being manifested amongst us. We shine Christ together. In this way, when we follow the way of Christ, we are remembering Jesus. When we live into the way of peace, of love for God, others, as ourselves, you and I get to share the resurrected Christ with others, and others likewise live into the call of God, sharing Christ back to us. I think Christ is being manifested in our world all the time. Sometimes we see it, and sometimes we don't. When strangers provide shelter, Christ is being manifested. When the hungry are fed, when the lonesome find company, when a word of comfort is spoken, when healing takes place, when the powerful turn their backs on oppression, when abusers and users and cheaters fall contrite on their knees, when the lenses of hate and apathy and fear fall from our eyes and are replaced with love that allows us to see others as fellow beloveds. We believe in new life, I think, because we've experienced it. We've seen life overcome death. We've seen violent people learn peace. I know it can be hard to think of right now, but we have seen it, and we will see it again. We've seen cruel hearts learn love, and we will continue to see that in this world. We've seen lives transformed, and right now, lives continue to be transformed. If we have faith, I think it's because we know there is more for us than doubts. And if we have hope, it's because we have more than despair. And if we have love, it's because we know there is so much more than hate. Not just for us, but for all our neighbors. And so my Easter hope, my Easter prayer, is that we walk in the footsteps of these women we call apostles to the apostles. Because we've got some news that still needs to be said and still needs to be heard over and over again.